Later this month marks 1 year since the historic first season of The Golden Bachelor ended. Viewers watched Jerry Turner propose to Theresa Nist during the season finale. They quickly tied the knot just 2 months later in a televised TV wedding. But the golden wedding didn't last long. They split 3 months later. Theresa Nist admits in a new interview that there was more to her divorce from Jerry Turner than distance. So what was the real reason? Golden Bachelor couple blamed location for split. Theresa Nist and Jerry Turner said the reason they rushed down the altar was their age. "We're going to do it as quickly as we can, because at our age, we don't have a lot of time to waste," he said at the time. But they announced their divorce on Good Morning America 3 months after the wedding. They said that neither one of them was willing to move away from their families. Jerry Turner is based in Indiana and Theresa Nist lives near her daughter in New Jersey. Her daughter welcomed her 4th child earlier this month. But Bachelor Nation fans suspected there was more to the story. And they were right. Theresa Nist admits distance wasn't real reason for divorce. Theresa Nist joined Ben Higgins and Ashley Iaconetti on their Almost Famous podcast this week. She was reluctant to discuss exactly what led to the split. "You really can't know somebody in 4 weeks. I'll say that. That's all I can say," she said. Theresa added, "It's not just the location thing. That's all I'll say." Despite saying she didn't want to talk about it, she shed light on the change in their original plan to move to Charleston, South Carolina. She said that she didn't want to sell her home in New Jersey until they had purchased a home in South Carolina. However, at that point, she claims Jerry Turner revised the original plan. Jerry came up with the idea of doing 6 weeks there and 6 weeks here. "I truly wanted to have our home together. I was willing to move. I wanted to have our big home where our family could come visit us. I didn't want to go back and forth to our homes." She recently enjoyed night out with Leslie Fema. Theresa Nist's relationship with Jerry Turner is done, but she's still close with several of her Golden Bachelor co-stars. Surprisingly, one of her closest friends is former rival for Jerry's affections, Leslie Fema. Many viewers thought Jerry was going to choose Leslie, but he chose Theresa instead. Leslie and Theresa have remained friends despite fans pitting them against each other. Theresa even visited Leslie in Minnesota earlier this year. They both recently flew to Los Angeles and were in the Dancing with the Stars live audience. Theresa took a photo with several DWTS contestants and pros, including Bachelor Nation's Joey Graziadei. What do you think Theresa Nist meant when she said you can't get to know somebody in 4 weeks? What didn't she know about Jerry Turner? Theresa Nist sat on the edge of the couch, her hands nervously twisting a silver ring that she wore on her left index finger. The soft lighting of her apartment, a modest yet cozy space filled with the scent of lavender-scented candles, created an almost peaceful contrast to the storm that had been raging within her heart for years. She had never imagined that one day she would find herself talking openly about the end of her marriage, let alone admitting the truth she had hidden for so long. For years, when people asked about her divorce, she'd used the excuse that the distance was too much for her and her ex-husband to overcome. The miles that stretched between their lives, the schedules that never seemed to sync, and the challenges of maintaining. The decision to speak out came after months of self-reflection. She had spent countless hours journaling, meditating, and talking to close friends, trying to unravel the reasons behind her actions. It wasn't until she sat down with her therapist one afternoon that the veil of denial finally began to lift. They had discussed the role of distance in her marriage, both physical and emotional, but it wasn't until Theresa spoke the words aloud that the truth hit her like a thunderclap. "I wasn't scared of the distance," Theresa admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I was scared of myself. I was scared of the person I had become, of the life I had built, and of the choices I had made that brought me to that point." The revelation was raw, painful, and liberating all at once. Theresa had always prided herself on being a rational person, someone who could see the bigger picture and make decisions based on logic and reason. But in the end, she had ignored the subtle signals from her heart and allowed her marriage to falter under the weight of unresolved issues. The truth, she now understood, was that the distance between her and her ex-husband was symbolic. It represented the growing emotional chasm that had been widening for years. In the beginning, their relationship had been full of passion and connection. They had shared dreams, hopes, and aspirations. But somewhere along the way, life had gotten in the way. The pressures of work, the demands of family, and the constant juggling of responsibilities had chipped away at their bond. They had started to drift apart, not because of physical distance, but because they had stopped putting in the effort to truly understand each other. Looking back, Theresa could pinpoint the exact moment when the cracks in her marriage first began to show. It had been a subtle shift, something she had ignored at the time, dismissing it as a temporary bump in the road. They had been at a family gathering, surrounded by well-meaning relatives who asked all the wrong questions. Theresa had tried to smile, to laugh, to pretend that everything was fine, but her husband's silence spoke volumes. He hadn't looked at her the way he used to, hadn't listened to her in the way that made her feel seen and heard. At that moment, she had realized something crucial: they had stopped being each other's confidants, the people who shared their fears and dreams. They had become roommates, not partners. The distance between them had not been caused by miles on a map, but by an emotional disconnect that neither of them had known how to address. As the years went by, Theresa found herself withdrawing more and more. She threw herself into her work, into projects that kept her busy and distracted. She built walls around herself, afraid that if she let them down, the cracks in her marriage would be too obvious to ignore. Her ex-husband, meanwhile, had done the same. They had both allowed their individual worlds to expand while their shared world began to shrink. The long-distance excuse had been the perfect out, a way to avoid confronting the painful reality of what was happening in their relationship. They had tried to make it work, sending texts and making occasional phone calls, but the emotional intimacy they had once shared had long since evaporated. The conversations had become superficial, the silences more pronounced. But Theresa knew deep down that distance wasn't the real issue. The real issue was their failure to prioritize each other, to nurture their connection in a world that constantly pulled them in different directions. It was their inability to communicate openly about their needs, desires, and fears.